Hi, I'm back again, and I was disconnected in my live, and I'm reading the Princess Royale, the Princess Mary, and the Princess Anne, and this here is Princess Mary, who she was the daughter of King George V and Queen Mary, and she was the Princess Mary during World War One. She was so dedicated and so conscientious as a princess. She wrote letters, numerous letters to George and Mary, her mother, um, about what was happening while they were in India when King George V, was coronated or went through a ceremony in India as the Emperor of India. So I would really like to read this out, and it is better to read it in bits and pieces, breaks it up a little bit. So, most delightful is your proposal to bring Mary, wrote this old lady, then in her 90th year, and Queen Mary noted her daughter's reaction with a sense of interest. Mary delighted. She was awfully interested. She was very observant. This was the Princess Mary's first visit to Germany, only 2 years later, before the curtains of 1914 of the 1914 war closed. The young princess returned to London with her mind aglow with motoring expeditions and evenings that had been spent looking at old photograph albums, and with hours of family talk, learning of family history and the past and present, all so that it might entail all that it might entail. Mary is dying to hunt and has no one to go with, wrote King George early in 1913. With concern that, and so often with princesses, companionable boys of her age were scarce. A girl could not ride to hounds alone, and Mary was forced for a while to practice her venturesome fences and hedges in the private reaches of the Windsor Great Park. Neither of her elder brothers shared her enthusiasm. Although he later became addicted to the thrills of polo and steeplechasing, the Prince of Wales considered riding lessons to be a dull chore. Bertie, the future George VI, was then away at sea on the HMS Cumberland, and the princess picked up what expertise she could from grooms and occasional visits to riding friends. In those days, her father was perhaps her principal riding teacher, and Londoners often saw Princess Mary with the king, enjoying the early morning riding in the Row. Gruffly severe as he was with his sons, King George, he was never harsh with his daughter. And indeed, the princess's relationship with each of her parents was one of understanding sympathy that needed no expense in words. Thus, on the August day in 1914, when Britain went to war, she shared the acute burden of their responsibility and anxieties and was anxious to evolve new duties of her own. The scheme of Princess Mary's gift boxes has a naive air today, but it was a plan that she organized and launched herself with a 17-year-old's impetuosity, impetuous, uh, I can't seem to get that, impetuosity. Okay, that's as close as I get, sorry. Which put to good purpose the eager patriotism of friends and followers of her own generation. I want you all, she said in her first public appeal, to help me send a Christmas present from the whole nation to every sailor afloat and every soldier on the front. The money poured in, and hundreds of thousands of servicemen received tin boxes packed with tobacco, cigarettes, or chocolate, with Princess Mary's portrait on the lid and a message from Princess Mary and friends at home wishing the recipient a happy Christmas and a victorious New Year. The boxes permanently established the princess as a responsible and popular royal figure. The point of contact seemed so close and genuine that many soldiers and sailors kept their tins, and years later, when she toured Canada, brought them out to show her with touching affection. But the young Princess Mary's attitude was one of total involvement. When not visiting hospitals or munitions plants with her mother, or serving at soup kitchens, or packing parcels with Girl Guides, she knitted endlessly. When wool became scarce, relatives visiting the palace would often find her fingers still busy unraveling unworn, old woolen garments. In her journal for 1915, Queen Mary mentioned the shocking war casualties encountered on the hospital visits with her daughter and the sadness of seeing badly wounded men without arms and legs, or even eyes. It was a rare occasion if the princess was steered aside to tour less distressing wards with one of the youngest nurses. In such instances, they were apt to become all the more imprinted on her mind. Years after being escorted around the military hospital at Netley in the Way, the princess was taken around again by the same nurses and promoted to matron, and remembered her so well that she took up the conversation where they had left off 27 years earlier. Wow, how do you remember? That's a good memory. More regularly, though, the air raid era of 1916 to 1918, she walked across the Green Park from Buckingham Palace to the Devonshire House, where she worked for a voluntary aid detachment. People grew used to seeing her and saluting her, just as local Londoners had grown accustomed to her as a child when she walked across from Marlborough House with her governess every Friday to put half her pocket money in her savings account at the post office opposite St. James Palace. To be royal entailed setting an example, and when needful, to be doing so. Princess Mary had been so thoroughly grounded in the precept by her mother that it became second nature. A Princess Royale, Victoria's daughter, had been sure that royal duty ran like ripples in a pool. Far beyond the throne, the subsequent Princess Royale, the Duchess of Fife, may have been too pathologically shy to set her niece an example, but as the King's daughter of 1914 to 1918, Princess Mary accepted her task and its values as she accepted the need of smiling or acknowledging greetings or remembering faces. "And what would you like for a birthday gift?" the king inquired shortly before her coming of age. It amused the family that the princess desired neither tiaras nor a pearl necklace, but merely the permission to work as a probationer at the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. That's important. Look at that. There she is. You know, I think that's so important. The key feature, and I think that was copied in Downton Abbey when their youngest daughter went to go train as a nurse. I think her name was Sybil. So it's so interesting. She went to go train as a nurse during the First World War. And you can see here that Mary did the same thing. So I wonder if they copied that in the story. She had unveilingly mentioned the project several times already, but now she had her way. To save petrol, she drove to and from the hospital in a one-horse palace brougham, but in every other respect took the pains to seem an ordinary student nurse, so that patients sometimes asked, "Is she really the princess?" Ask her niece, Princess Alexandra. was to do nearly 40 years later. She worked her scheduled steady progress through the wards and lecture rooms. There is the customary story of a sister who stepped in and to prevent the royal student emptying a chamber pot, but also intercepting a warning. Windsor looked and desisted. Unknown to the princess, the question of transfer to the surgical side was put before Queen Mary. Why not? Said the queen, and her daughter served her turn on duty in the operating theater, just clearing up. Wow. In time, after the Second World War, Princess Mary appeared to be an insulated and conventional figure, but the joke rebounds on ourselves. In her 20s, she stepped a little beyond the fussy, conventional standards of her own day, like any other young person. On Armistice Day in 1918, she telephoned Devonshire House and asked for the VAD staff to march down to Buckingham Palace and form up in the courtyard. Among the huge crowd surrounding the palace, it was an incredible honor to be with the guard when the king came out, as Dame Beryl Oliver recalled. Soon after her 21st birthday that year, the princess had also been appointed Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Scots. But this could never again be merely a nominal or purely decorative function. In her VAD uniform, Princess Mary took the salute of her regiment as it marched through the ruined streets of Ypres, setting a characteristic and enduring precedent for princesses of the future. She was henceforth to be deeply involved with the doings and the welfare of her regiments, and her lady-in-waiting of 20 years, Miss Gwynedd Lloyd, has said, and when the Queen appointed her Major General in the British Army, the first woman to hold the rank in history, it gave her extraordinary pleasure and satisfaction. All the royal brothers, they were young and old, and they were deeply fond of their sister. As they grew up, as they grew up, they seemed increasingly the very pivot of family life. The king and queen were not always approachable, or if consulted, their minds seemed to be preoccupied. The brothers were successfully in and out of favor with the king, but Mary was always the great mentor, the go-between, eager to go further anyone's cause but her own. She doesn't confide in me. I don't feel she is happy, the Prince of Wales, then, who became the Duke of Windsor, complained one day to Queen Mary's close friend, Lady Airlie. More perceptive and sensitive than the younger brothers, he felt that the king liked having Mary at home and did not really want her to marry. Well, I tell you, Princess Queen Alexandria did that to her daughter, Victoria. So they all like at least one of them hanging at home. Um, on one occasion, he tried to persuade his mother to talk to the king on the topic, but discovered she had done nothing about it. I'm so annoyed with her, he told Lady Airlie, that I haven't been near her for over a week. The cause of the discussion was probably the latest newspaper rumor, for journalists were always eager then, as they were now, to forecast whom a princess would wed. The Earl of Dalkeith, the Viscount Althorp, and the Marquis of Northampton and others found their names in print as possible suitors, much to Mary's dismay. The problem kept the public in suspense, but appealed equally to scores of people who knew the princess and were not content to wait on events. When the Marchioness of Curzon entertained the king and queen and their daughter to dinner one night, she decided to entertain the princess and perhaps satisfy her own curiosity by inviting a number of these eligible young men whom she knew. Then after dinner she asked the princess whom she would like brought to her, and she rattled her list of names, and among them were Lord Spencer, Lord Northampton, and Lord Lascelles. Princess Mary at once answered, Lord Lascelles. Watching them talk together, Lady Curzon quickly suspected romance was in the air. Gossip arrived that the Viscount Lascelles and Princess Mary first met on the hunting field, and hunting was indeed one of their mutual passions. But the real links were far firmer and founded on true family strength. The seventh Duke and the Duchess of Buccleuch were among the King and Queen's oldest friends. The King and the Duke had first met as young naval cadets. They had married in the same year, and the Duke's eldest son was soon to marry into the Lascelles family. After the war, Harry Lascelles figured even more frequently in the Sandringham shooting parties. He was in fact nearly 15 years older than the princess. It was almost the story of Lulu and Fife all over again. Okay, I'm going to pause just a minute because a lot of people like to talk about Prince Charles when he married Diana. They were 12-ish years apart, and I think that was pretty common. And when you look back into Princess Diana's mother and father, her mother was the young bride and her father was the older bride. Her mother, I think, was 18 or 19, and she married John Spencer. He was then the Viscount John Spencer. So having that kind of an age gap at that time among the aristocrats and the nobles was common. So that's just my thought process. Then one Sunday in November 1921, he found himself the only guest at York Cottage, apart from Queen Mary's brother, Prince Algy, and after tea, Princess Mary very literally took her fate into her hands by asking him if he would like to see her little sitting room upstairs. Lord Lascelles needed no second prompting, and they were no sooner behind closed doors when he proposed marriage. Before giving him an answer, Mary rushed down the little staircase to tell her mother. According to Lady Airlie, and found the Queen resting in a kimono and slippers talking to Prince Algy. The conversation went on and on until the princess could bear it no longer. Mamma, please, she burst in. I must speak to you. Harry Lascelles was meanwhile still patiently waiting upstairs. Every sound could often be heard through the ceilings of York Cottage. A noisy, laughing procession went its way to the king's room, and with the queen, still in her kimono and slippers, the king gave his consent, and only then was the embarrassing intending bridegroom called downstairs. We then gave Harry L. our blessing. The queen wrote in her diary the next day, we were very cheerful and almost uproarious at dinner. Mary simply beaming, she added in subsequent correspondence, such a blessing to feel she will not go abroad. 3 days later, when the engagement was announced, the British public in turn responded, if not with excessive warmth, at least with pleasure and affection. Viscountess Lascelles was not photogenic. People had not expected their princess to marry someone so much older than herself. But then the romantic story of a miser and his sandwiches came to light and instantly draped Lord Lascelles in the necessary mantle of glamour. For he was the grandnephew of the last Marquis of Clanricarde, who was chiefly remembered in the West End clubs as a miserly eccentric, a lonely figure who would retrieve other members' discarded sandwiches from the wastepaper basket and was widely reputed to rummage for hunks of bread in the dustbins. His family shunned him. One day, touched at the sight of the shabby and lonely old figure whom he had not seen since boyhood, Lascelles went up to speak to him. 2 months later, the recluse died, and in a codicil to his will, left his nephew all but a few thousand of his total fortune of £2.5 million. That is a lot of money back then. Such a story was, of course, irresistible, added to the announcement of a wedding on 28 February in Westminster Abbey and the promise of the first state pageant since the coronation. The Duke of York, the future George VI, wrote in some excitement to the Prince of Wales. As far as I can make out, the 28th is going to be a day of national rejoicing. Undertaking a tour in India at the time, the Prince of Wales missed all the fun, and the Duke of York, who was falling in love himself, presently also acquainted his brother with the charming fact that Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was to be one of the bridesmaids. The actual ceremony at the Abbey was beautiful. He afterwards wrote, "The streets were overcrowded all along the road of procession. Mary looked lovely in her wedding dress." Queen Mary then took up the story in another letter to her eldest son. Mary and Harry L. drove off at 3:45. Papa and all of us throwing rice and little paper horseshoes and rose leaves after them. Papa and I felt miserable at parting. Poor Papa broke down. The king indeed recorded in his own private journal, "Felt very low and depressed now that my darling Mary has gone." And the next day he added, "I just miss darling Mary too awfully." Princess Mary was now the Viscountess Lascelles, and had indeed been at the center of her parents' daily life as well as that of her brothers. On the first stage of her honeymoon at Weston Park, the Earl of Bradford's vast and idyllic home in Shropshire, she received with interest the daily gate statistics of the people who had streamed into St. James's Palace to see her wedding gifts and bridal gown. Even with her wedding, she collected funds for her favorite charities, and in 6 weeks, over 100,000 people visited the exhibition. And with a gain of thousands of pounds to orphanage, the Girl Guides, and an ex-serviceman's home. That's interesting that they put all their wedding paraphernalia and gifts on display and collected charity out of it. So the married couple settled into one of the spare Jacobean mansions of the LaSalle family, Goldsborough Hall, near Knaresborough, where their first son, the 7th Earl of Harewood, was born in 1923. Thus was forged Princess Mary's first link with the county which she made so much her own. My love for this part of Yorkshire has become such an integral part of my life. It would be a great sorrow for me to contemplate making my home elsewhere, she once said with obvious sincerity when given the freedom of Harrogate. Goldsborough was inwardly a lovely house of panelled rooms and old oak staircases, outwardly restored perhaps too much in style of Sandringham, but redeemed by its glorious gardens. These furnished the princess with another rich interest of her life. The grounds had been neglected, and presently she was able to write that they were coming on well. If for a time she withdrew a little from public life after the birth of her second son, Gerald Lascelles, in 1924, it should be added that her husband's personality lacked the ingredients of swift public popularity. His tact was such that when a film production unit made a harmless little picture of the Brahmin Moor hunt, of which he was master, he autocratically ordered cuts to be made. Nor would he permit it to be trade shown except in the presence of watchful Home Office officials. The Prince of Wales is supposed to have said, I get commoner and commoner, while Lascelles gets more and more royal. When the glamour of Princess Mary's wedding had been forgotten, people wondered what she saw in him. The prime attraction was probably a father image that underlaid the shooting and riding, the love of country pursuits, the zest for the turf, the bridge, and the bezique, although the king himself preferred whist and poker. There were strong elements of physical resemblance, the same gruff, intolerant outbursts, though never actually directed at the princess. Yet husband and wife shared equally a private and considerable discerning taste in the arts. It's an interest they shared that George V never had. The planting of trees and the planting of trees and shrubs would immerse them in deep discussion, and the problem of farming and the stud farm, first at Goldsboro and then at Harewood, there were constant topics of conversation. Both shared a keen and knowledgeable interest in the countryside, and the closest of witnesses, their two sons, found home life so happy that on being sent away to prep school, both boys suffered pangs of homesickness. It was deeper than their parents ever suspected. Lord Lascelles succeeded his father as the sixth Earl of Harewood in 1929. Generations of Harewoods had embellished the Harewood house. The new Earl added his collection of Italian paintings, and in the family rooms, Princess Mary, the new Countess of Harewood, demonstrated her inclination toward the then fashionable Adam revival. Their son, the seventh Lord Harewood, recollected that his parents ran Harewood with some degree of grandeur. 40 for dinner sometimes in the big dining room, an indoor staff of 27, augmented when the king and queen came to stay. It was quite in keeping with this atmosphere that on the 1st of January 1932, nearly a year after the death of Princess Louise, the New Year's honors list was held with the words, "The King has been graciously pleased to declare that His Majesty's daughter, Her Royal Highness Princess Victoria Alexandra Alice Mary, the Countess of Harewood, shall henceforth bear the style and title of Princess Royal." No doubt the gold plate was brought out at the next Harewood dinner party, but the new Princess Royal had already resumed a growing accumulation of royal duties as a matter of course. One finds her striking the pattern of a carefully scheduled crowded day that has since become standard routine for the royal ladies. The stress of Yorkshire interests did not diminish her words for the Red Cross, the Royal Air Force Nursing Service, the Girls' Guide movement, or any of her unstinted wider interests. The Duke of Windsor once had wrote, "The word duty fell between us." He was recalling the painful interviews when he told his mother and his sister together of his unqualified love for the divorced Mrs. Simpson and his determination to marry her. The Princess Royal did sympathize with her brother, but for her henceforth, and more than ever, there's always duty, too. That is so good. Duty was so important to Princess Mary. She was like a little version of her mother, the Queen Mary, and her father. She got that from her father. Even in her girlhood, she could seldom be diverted from the appointed tasks of the day. When my brothers and I wanted her to play tennis, as the Duke of Windsor recollected, she used to refuse because she had her French translation to do, or she hadn't read the Times. The princess was nearly 40 when her father died, and it was part of her duty that she became her mother's comfort and companion, and her consolation, too. As scene by scene they endured the prolonged drama of the abdication. With the family at Royal Lodge, they listened together to the former Edward VIII's last broadcast when he was introduced so strangely at the microphone as Prince Edward. Then the Princess Royale diplomatically curtailed the leave taking so that she and her mother were the first to leave. But the die was cast, and his sister was also the first of the family to visit the Duke of Windsor abroad. She traveled to Vienna with her husband shortly after the first Christmas. The Duke had taken refuge with friends at Schloss Ensfield, and his sister was not only the first visitor from home, but also the only one to help lessen the initial shock of exile. Again, years later, when the Duke returned to Marlborough House to see his mother in old age and to sleep under her roof for a night or two, Mary, she was also there. She was sympathetic, understanding, and an unobtrusive mentor. On his subsequent visits to London, brother and sister invariably dined together. Their privacy remained absolute within the walls of St. James's Palace, where the Princess Royale had moved into the south-facing garden suite as her London home. Yet her loyalty to her second brother, George VI, was also absolute. During his pre-war visit to Canada, his two wartime visits to his armies overseas, his 1947 tour of South Africa, and again during his illness in 1951, she was appointed a Counselor of State, the only Princess Royal ever thus to undertake constitutional deputy duties for the sovereign. Within 2 weeks of the King's return from South Africa in 1947, a large family luncheon party was held at the palace to celebrate Queen Mary's 80th birthday. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor paid one of their fleeting visits to London shortly beforehand, and the princess and her brother dined together as usual, discussing the party and the plans for their birthday gifts. The Duke had messages that he'd wished to pass to old friends and, of course, to Harry, who was at Harewood suffering from a chill. Yet Princess Royale was destined not to attend the family reunion, for her husband died with a tragic suddenness only 2 days beforehand. I didn't know that. Okay, we're on to the last part, I believe. Oh no, it's got two other small parts, but 10 pages left, so I think I'll break this up into a three-parter so that people can listen to it in three parts. So